Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, George Gilson. Today we have with us director Christopher Sanderson, founder and director of the Gorilla Rep Theater here in New York City. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, George.
That's great. Tell me about how Gorilla Rep got started.
Sure. Gorilla Rep as an entity got started when I did a production of Ubu is King, which was my one-act adaptation of Ubu Wa by Alfred Jarry. And I took 5 men and 5 women, and we kind of invaded Grand Central Station basically with a very controversial costume for the character of Ubu that had a big 3-foot dick. And there were 10 scenes, and the part of Ubu was traded off. So sometimes women played the part of Ubu, sometimes men. And basically the powers that be there at the station got a little hot under the collar about it. They booted us out even though we had a permit to be there. And basically they booted us on a Sunday. On Monday, the ACLU was on our side. By Tuesday was their director of their National Anti-Censorship Project that was representing us. The Village Voice covered it for 3 weeks consecutively. The Living Theater hosted us while we were in exile. And basically we put it all back together with an even better cast the second time. And the intensity of that sort of trial by fire led me to want to continue working with those actors. And I said, listen, before we all break up and go to the 4 winds, I'd be willing to listen if you guys want to talk about starting a collective. I'll start a board and we'll see where we can go. And from there, basically sitting in Cafe Borgia, I was looking at Amo Villanello, who I've worked with, since that production. It's got to be 4 or 5 years now. And I said, what do we call it? Because at the time I was calling Gorilla with a U, but to me political theater is an oxymoron. It's like all theater is political. I mean, the act of charging somebody $75 and putting them in a seat that's bolted in one direction is a political act. Doing it in Grand Central is a political act.
Why is that a political act, to put somebody in a seat?
Well, because it implies that that they have the money, the disposable income to blow $75, and that implies a certain class of person that you are encouraging to come to your production. That's a political act. Not giving them the freedom to move around and edit their own experience is a political act. Can I get you a pen or something? All theater is a political act. You know, and when I do theater for free for people in the park of all educational backgrounds, of all racial, gender, economic backgrounds, I'm willing to admit that that's a political act, but I think that doing political theater per se is always preaching to the converted, and I'm not interested in it. And I think that I'd rather do agent provocateur type of stuff than preaching to the converted per se. And I didn't like the...
Why is political theater preaching to the converted? I thought that was intended to preach to the non-converted.
Well, you'd think that.
Or you're saying that it can't be that way?
Well, I don't know if it can or can't. For me, it's not interesting, and that's the main thing. I have to follow my own hunches as an artist. I will say that I was, with the exception of Augusto Boal, I was never impressed by people who call themselves political theoreticians. They always seem very political and very not theater. You know,
who's Augusto Boal?
Augusto Boal is a very famous practitioner of theater techniques. He has a center in Paris, and I believe he's going to kill me if he sees this. I can't remember. I think it's Venezuela anyway. But in his native country, he was a regular theater director for what we would call Broadway. When Pinochet, when the dictator came to power, he took his theatrical techniques and he used it to agitate, to rise resistance against this dictator. And the techniques that he made up in doing that have become famous as what's called the theater of the oppressed. And he's a fine man, a credible man of the theater, if you will. But it wasn't the direction that even him doing that great, it was not the direction I wanted to go in. I wanted to create theater. I just wanted to take it to people where they are, and that's what A Midsummer Night's Dream in Washington Square Park and doing King Lear in Washington Square Park are all about. It's about taking theater, highest possible quality theater, to people where they are. And I think what I'm really saying is that political artists seem to compromise the artistic in favor of the political. And for me, you can't say anything political unless your art is impeccable, and that's what I'm interested in.
So what if your art is impeccable? Can't you say something political then?
That's it's up to the artist. I think so. Yeah, I do.
What can you say? What would you want to say political?
Well,
if you were going to put it in a couple sentences or...
Sure. A Midsummer Night's Dream is about the politics of love. and about the notion that love in itself is such a confusing notion that when you feel love, you should be true to it. And that's a political notion, that love is over and above the law, over and above the wishes of even parents. That may be his political idea. Lear has a darker political message. It's more about the horrible consequences of the abdication of responsibility by people at the highest pinnacle of power. Lear's responsibility really at the beginning is not to abdicate and to take a vacation. His responsibility, talking in textbook terms, would be to assure the stability of his state. But instead he chooses, perhaps for the first time in his career, to take his personal gain over his idea of retiring, to make that more important than the stability of his state, and to a large extent that's what dictates the rest of the tragedy. And we see that. The haves in Lear have everything. The have-nots are almost in a concentration camp situation. And that's something that Lear himself realizes over the course.
What is that? How is that instructive to you or to me or to us?
Well, you'll have to see the show and tell me, George.
Well, no, you'll have to tell me now, actually.
I know, but in the sense.
No, how do you
right? If I wanted to put
think of it or feel about it.
Right. I'll tell you everything I think and feel. It might sound goofy, and I'll tell you why. Because my chosen art form is theater, and the way that I say what I want to say is through the stage pictures, the theater, the text that I choose, and that I hope is my most eloquent statement. That's all I meant to say. So I think that there's a huge amount that I want to say and that I feel about that.
Tell us more about the essence of the statement.
Which one?
Of how this is political. I mean, you said that
Sure.
Lear
No problem.
abdicates his authority
His
or
power.
responsibility.
His responsibility. Yeah, he
How
abdicates.
does he do that? And,
Well-
and why is that important to you?
Well, I'll tell you.
What sort of lesson does that have to teach? Or
It's got a lot of different lessons, definitely. I'm trying to pack them all into it, because Shakespeare packs them all into his text. That text is so dense, Now, the first thing is your first part of your question is, how does he do that? How does he abdicate responsibility? Well, he walks in the first scene and says, hey everybody, I've got a great idea. I'm going to divide up the kingdom between my daughters. Now, that implies a lot of things. First of all, it implies that there's a unified kingdom, right? That he's managed to unify the kingdom and centralize power and give stability to the kingdom. And we're not at a state of war, so everybody must be more or less kind of happy with the way things are, except for Lear. He figures after all this time unifying this kingdom, what he's going to do is take himself a vacation. And while he crawls unburdened towards death, have his daughters take over the reins of power. Now, the problem with that is that he's resegmenting a political order that's already been forged into one in the form of his personality. Remember, this is a barbarian. Shakespeare sets King Lear in a time long before any real history had begun. It's an England. It's almost prehistoric. It's certainly pre-Roman. The actual figure of Lear that Shakespeare bases King Lear on is almost as legendary as like King Arthur. It's not really, the actual facts are just totally shaded, so Shakespeare is definitely creating a fiction wherein he has these lessons to teach. And your first part of your question was, how does he abdicate it? He abdicates it by trying to give it away to his daughters. And I think we see even a spark of the fact that he understands how irresponsible that is in how quickly he overreacts to Cordelia. In the first scene, she's not having any of it. I mean, she's learned, her daughters, his other daughters have learned how to be courtiers, but Cordelia has learned how to be a leader. And she says, I want to be honest, because you taught me to be honest. And honestly, I love you, that's it. I'm not going to love you more than my husband. That's not what you taught me. You see what I'm saying? And he just totally flies off the handle and makes statements that have to stick because he's the quote-unquote king. And as he says to Kent, I have sworn, I am firm, I have never broken my oath. And he has to live by these things that are done in essentially a fit of anger after he's already given up power. But the daughters are happy to make him live by it. The older daughters are happy to make him live by these things that he said rashly in anger.
Right. But there have been so many times when leaders die without apparent successors, and that creates a lot of problems, perhaps even more than here.
Sure.
Why is that necessarily such a foolhardy decision to divide his kingdom.
Sure.
Unless one takes the opinion that, you've got to keep kingdoms together, otherwise,
Right. Well, in this case, Shakespeare. Sure. In this case, Shakespeare writes the story, basically, of why it's bad in this situation. And the story he writes is the twofold implications. What the bad things that the decision does to King Lear himself, personally, internally, and the consequences that he has to live with in terms of being turned out into the storm and absolutely completely stripped of even the appurtenances, he wanted to keep all the glittery stuff about being a king. He wanted to keep the easy stuff. He wanted to keep running around with his 100 knights. He wanted to keep feasting. He wanted to keep talking about old battles, whatever. But he's even stripped of that. He's taught the consequences of what he does personally. But in the course of the state, of course, a vacuum is created, and both of the daughters and France, who Cordelia's gone with, France invades England to try to reinstate some stability. So the three factions basically are warring against each other to create to reinstate the precedent that Lear set by having one single leader. That's what they all want, and they all want to be it, all three of those forces, and so they war to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In this whole chaos, it allows the bastard Edmund to people are so het up already that Edmund is able to say, oh brother, our father's really angry, you better run away. And then meanwhile run over and say, oh father, our brother, I think he's plotting to kill you, and put all this intrigue together that in a calm, stable society, people will be like, what the fuck are you up to? You are under arrest. Forget about this. Do you know what I'm saying? But there's such an attitude of chaos that the bastard feels he can make this power grab, and he's only caught at the very last instant after it's already been proven lethal for Cordelia and ultimately for Lear, and even for his own father Gloucester, who he's betrayed. Luckily, he himself is also killed, for our sense of closure on that particular subplot.
Tell us a little bit about Christopher Sanderson. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born and grew up, all that sort of thing.
That's awful nice. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, and I was the son of two long lines of cattle farmers in Cumberland County, which is a nice little county right in the middle, smack in the Piedmont. Both my parents ran away to the big city to meet someone from the big city and ended up falling in love with each other and not admitting to each other where they were from. And then when they did, it turned out their farms were 12 miles apart. It was kind of a letdown, but nonetheless, they created our family. We lived all over the place.
So the big city of New York.
The big city actually for them was Richmond itself.
Richmond, Virginia.
Because they were both from Cumberland. They were at Virginia Commonwealth University at the time, and we lived all over the country. People tell me my accent is still very Midwestern. We lived in Kansas, we lived in Georgia, we lived ultimately in New Jersey, where I went to high school, Princeton Public High School, during a time when I thought I was the only person that thought it was a unique time, but I guess it turns out that basically because the spotlight of success has happened to several of my classmates, actually fellow fuck-ups at the time, it wasn't just a fruitful time just for me. I was acting, I was given so much freedom at that high school.
Which years are we talking about?
I guess that's like 80, 81, 82, 83, right around in there.
Uh-huh.
And I'm being allowed to direct Sartre. I'm directing a production of No Exit, and someone else is doing Edward Albee's Zoo Story, and Chris Barron was in a musical, and Popper is out playing with the jazz band and going wild. And during that time, they were thinking of making Princeton into an arts magnet school. So they gave us all a lot of fine teachers and a lot of latitude to try to prove that was a good idea. Of course, the year after that, the bottom fell out of the budget, so that idea went south. But still, for that brief time, we were all
encouraged. It went south. I've never heard that expression before. Does that mean it's heard of flunked or
died?
Why is that went south, though? Is south bad?
Sunk, like as in sunk. Went
going from up to down.
I'm from the south, so the south is not bad.
From up to down, or
right? From
success to failure. Or
exactly. So it went away. Like it went south for the winter. It went away. So that was exciting, and then I bummed around Paris for a year after high school, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But I was intensely interested in doing theater, but I wanted to do it in a new way. Basically, just to get the hell out of anywhere where I knew anyone at all. I wanted to be by myself when I wanted to be. I mean, I was a teenager, but I was smart enough to know that being a teenager is an extraordinarily conceited time in anybody's life.
When you went to Paris, you were a teenager?
Yeah.
What, 17,
like
18? But you must have had some idea what Paris was, or what it was to you at that moment.
Oh, sure.
What was that idea, and how was it wrong?
Supreme. It was right. It was a supreme.
Was it all right?
Yeah, it was fucking right.
Okay, what was it?
It was a supreme metaphor. Paris was a supreme metaphor for my most private inner longing to be the artist that I believed strongly that I could be.
So just Paris art.
It was absolutely. It was because people were literally running around going, "Oh, where are you going to college? Where are you going to college? Where are you going to college?" And they're like, "I'm going to Princeton. I'm going to here. I'm going to there." And I was like, "I'm going to Paris." And they're like, "Oh, University of America in Paris, or whatever it's called, the Sorbonne in Paris." And I was like, "No, I'm just going to Paris, and I'm going to bum around for a year." And it was like that was so alien to what was going on around me with people that it somehow mirrored the fact that they were like, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" "Well, I'm going to be a banker. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that." And I was like, I'm going to keep being an artist. And that was, in a parallel way, odd. So I took the risk of going to Paris to almost to regroup my forces and try to chase that totally illusory, romantic ideal of being an artist. And boy, did Paris work out great that way. It's so beautiful, you know. And I read Hemingway when I got there, so of course that enchanted me further.
Because you knew that.
Well, he's writing.
Hemingway had been in Paris.
Absolutely, Hemingway had been in Paris, and he was a hero of mine already. And I read A Movable Feast, where he says, if you go to Paris as a young man, it will stay with you for the rest of your life. For Paris is a movable feast. And that was one of the first things, one of the first lines I read, sitting in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris, and I was like, ah.
What book is that from?
Here it is, A Movable Feast by Hemingway. It's been, I think that might have been the last time I read it, but I read. There's a couple of books I read every year and just sort of annually, and The Old Man and the Sea is one of them. Because again, that for me is a strong personal metaphor for creating art, which is a hell of a difficult thing to do, looks like to me. But you got to put up with the difficulties, because then you just might get at bat, and if you get at bat a bunch, then one of those times you might hit a home run.
You say that when you went to Paris, you told your friends that you want to keep being an artist?
Well, in the sense that they were
so
like...
you had already conceived of yourself as an artist by the time you left?
Sure. At that time I was...
What made you think you were an artist?
Because it's the only thing I was good at. I wasn't...
What had you done?
Well, I had done debate, which I considered to be an art form, and I had won national... I had gone to national competition in that. I had done theater that people had applauded and enjoyed and thought was kind of odd, but that they liked.
What kind of theater?
Well, again, I directed that production of No Exit, and I had been in a few productions that the director there had done. The late Carol Winberg, the wonderful woman that taught theater to us, directed us in a few fun things that I was in, and I did a production of an UNESCO piece that I acted in. So I'd done a lot of acting.
Which piece was that?
And I wrote a lot of poetry, believe it or not.
Which UNESCO piece?
It's not that way, it's over here. It's not that way, it's over here. Mr. Smith and The Bald Soprano.
Oh, The Bald Soprano.
That was Mr. Smith, or was it Mr. Jones, or whatever. We had a ball with that. I had a ball doing that. And because Princeton was such a saturated arts community, and basically they just turned me loose. They were like, you're artistic, so prove it. And I loved that. I loved that. I thrived. I wrote a musical, I wrote poetry, I acted in stuff, I played music, I played the bass. I played stand-up bass with people. Actually, a couple times I remember smoking cigarettes outside and playing the bass, and Popper coming out and doing me the favor of playing Topper, playing along with me a little bit, because he was so fantastic.
That's his name, Popper?
Is it? Yeah.
That's his real name?
His real name is John Popper.
That is his name?
Yeah, but they call him Popper.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
So you and
we used to talk about
John Popper and Chris Barron from the Spin Doctors
and a bunch of other
were
people.
fellow classmates at Princeton High School.
Yeah.
Which is the public high school at Princeton, New Jersey.
Right.
Okay. And this was in the late 70s?
Early 80s.
Early 80s. Okay, cool. And Was there like an association, a clique of the sort of artistic folk there, or what?
There was so much art going on that there was many different art cliques. Which was great. Oh yeah. And I moved among as many of them as I possibly could. There was a clique of jazz musicians there who were brilliant. Like Nick Hastings was there, the most incredible trombone player in the world. You see him gigging around all the time now. He went to Brown, and he would play with his jazz friends, but then they were friends with the people who played ska, and they had different ska bands going on. But of course, they were friends with people who did the rock and roll bands that, of course, were jamming too. And then then I was also friends with the people who were doing theater, so sometimes that cross-fertilized into a musical, and we had great teachers. I mean, Portia Sonnenfeld, who unfortunately...
So, were you friends with Popper?
Not as close. I mean, me and Chris Barron were really close friends,
You were?
for a while. Yeah, in high school. He was a freshman, I was a senior, and we were just really close for a really intense year. Popper was like...
Usually freshmen and seniors aren't so close. How come you guys were...
Because he was incredibly talented, and he felt that I was incredibly talented, and we had a lot of very creative fucking up to do, but also...
Tell me about some of the creative fucking up.
We would climb to the tops of buildings and get as stoned as we could and sing the blues until we fell asleep with, a bunch of our friends, and we would bang on cans. And,
like what blues would you sing?
Mostly we usually just made them up.
You made up blues? Can you remember anything?
No.
Can you make up a blues now?
I could, but I won't do it.
You won't do it?
No. But thanks. Thanks for asking.
Sure.
I tell you, if Chris was here, I'd just say, Chris, just start singing, and he would play the guitar, and I'll play the bass for you.
Have you spoken to him since he started the Spin Doctors and all?
Absolutely. He, when he first did the Spin Doctors, he came with Popper into town, and I was doing a Midsummer Night's Dream for this, I guess, the second year, and he came and saw it, and he was so supportive and like, wow, this is incredible, because we hadn't seen each other for a while, and he would come and see Midsummers. He must have seen it like 6 or 8 times, and I would go and see the Spin Doctors over at Nightingale's because they had a gig every Tuesday night. And I've run into him a couple times. He'll be around the village, and we'll run into each other and chat. But we've stayed acquaintances, I would say. He's a great guy, and he's top on my list of people who I think should cross over into an acting career, because he was quite an actor back in his youth, and I think that he probably still got it in him for the right role.
So would you invite him to be in a play or something like that?
Well, actually, I have a film script under development right now with Sauce Entertainment that I feel like he's someone who should really take a look at one of the roles in that. I think Chris, the magnetism he's got might work best on film, but I don't know where he's at with that.
Broach the subject with him or not?
Oh wow, man! Every time I see him, I like bust his balls about coming out to act. He's fond of saying,
really?
Oh sure. He's fond of saying that he thinks that every actor in the world wants to be a rock and roll singer, and every rock and roll singer in the world wants to be an actor. And so someday I hope he makes good on and comes act with me.
Well, tell me about Copernicus. How did you find him to play your latest Lear for this summer's performance?
Sure. Well, Guerrilla Rep really started getting rolling this year. We got a grant from Laura Pell's foundation, which is they're very discriminating. We got
who are they?
Laura Pell's is a very generous woman who gives money to like the New York Shakespeare Festival and to basically the theater that she thinks is wonderful and that improves the artistic fabric of New York. And luckily we were the recipients of some of that generosity this year for our first time. We're only 4 years old, and Guerrilla Rep is. And we've gotten a few grants. We got one from the Nancy Quinn Fund for Emerging Theaters, but that was a one-time grant of about a year ago. And we got a contract with the Department of Cultural Affairs this year. Things really started rolling, and I started being able to see how I might be able to shoot for something that was a real risk, something perhaps bigger and more ambitious than anything I'd done in the past. God knows a lot of people who do and a lot of people who don't like what I do certainly consider it ambitious. And that's one thing they can agree on. And I had seen Copernicus, the first shows he did after he got rid of the band. Raw, uncensored intensity of his performance, and it had stuck with me for maybe 6 years, and I was casting for Midsummer for King Lear, and I hadn't realized that every time I read the damn script, I was seeing him in the role. I was hearing his voice, and you know, I'm nothing if not hunches. You know, if my hunches aren't on, then forget it. That's how I play the game: by feel, by hunch, by dream. You know, by dream. And I was dreaming of this intense older man, Copernicus, doing the role of Lear, and so I asked a stage manager to try to get in touch with him through the Village Voice advertising department. They did so. I did the pitch to Onanje, his agent, and I must have done it well because Copernicus tells me that Onanje then pitched him. Copernicus and I had phone calls back and forth. They were the beginning of something very intense. He eventually came in and auditioned and did a reading with two of the actors that I've worked with for a long time, Mark Greenfield and Amo Gulanella, both of whom are absolutely top flight, incredible actors whose professional career is absolutely taking off outside of Guerrilla Rep, but still do me the professional favor and courtesy of coming and working with me. And it was Greenfield as Kent, Amo as the Fool, and Lear, Copernicus. And he had intensity, he had energy. I just walked right up to him, I started giving him direction as if I had worked with him for 100 years. He responded to it immediately, went back into it, blew the room away. I turned around, there's a couple of board members there, a producer, and the stage manager, and their jaws were on the floor. I mean, I knew that what I was seeing, I had managed, he and I, to create a snapshot of what we could create in terms of the intensity of this role. And he agreed to do it, and the more I've worked with him, the more I found out that he is a scholarly man, he's an intelligent man, a well-rounded collaborator. He's the kind of worker that gives you 120%. He's always there for rehearsals. He spent the 4 months after our staged reading, which is what we did a weekend stage reading in December. He spent 4 months going over my notes, getting off book on the part, and basically encountering that role with an intensity that I've rarely even seen I've rarely seen period, and I think rarely exists in the theater. He's an absolute, he has a special, unique genius for performance, and it's an intensity that I look forward to showing people in Lear.
What do you remember about his performance? I mean, Copernicus has, I think, 5 albums out. Anything that strikes you about his message or what he does on stage as a performer, as Copernicus?
Well, the things that I like, I saw, and the things that I like I blush to admit, remained consistent. I like sincerity. I like energy. I like someone to create a performance that I can believe in. I studied with Ryszard Cieslak. He was the lead actor for the Polish Laboratory Theater, Grotowski's theater. Grotowski's a very famous physical theoretician, and even in Grotowski, I mean, Grotowski was such a Catholic, such a spiritual man. There was a spirituality to Copernicus's performance that went beyond his words, and went into the realm of just an utterly sincere energy that I felt could be modulated by correct directing into a brilliant Shakespearean performance.
Anything about the Copernicus message, the content of his performance?
I'm completely hip to it, no question.
What about it?
Spirituality has always been a very important thing to me personally. So I read Suzuki Roshi at a very young age. I read Watts. The whole subject of spirituality has always been something very interesting to me, very important to me. And
so how does that spirituality show in Copernicus?
Well, he takes a bunch of kids who've come for a good time and he bellows into their face, nothing exists, with an utter sincerity and a belief that forces them to sort of look into that Buddhistic idea, is it all an illusion? And I'm much less interested in answers than in processes, than questions and answers, which breed more questions, which breed more answers. And I think that if he manages to get one of those kids thinking, which looked like to me he did, that message is important.
Where was this performance, by the way?
In the East Village, I forget where.
Maybe Nada?
I think it might have been Nada.
Nada?
I think maybe. I've directed at Nada for the first time just a month ago, so it could have been that I didn't remember that it was Nada. Maybe. I remember it being a pretty small space, which not has got really low ceilings.
You went for your undergraduate degree to NYU, to the Tisch School.
Experimental Theater Wing.
Experimental Theater Wing.
And I wouldn't have got it without Ron Argelander, who's a practitioner and a teacher.
Why'd you want to go there?
New York is Oz for me, and I wanted to go straight to the Emerald City, and this is it.
Is it still Oz now?
Damn right. For me, absolutely.
And you've been here for what, about 6 years?
10 years. I've been, in the last 10 years, I've directed over 30 productions, and it's because I love what I do. I have an intensive commitment to it. Where does that commitment come from? Probably, just like I said, it's the only thing I'm really good at.
Tell me about your experience at Tisch.
I got there and I walked into Ron Argelander's office, and he gave me a cigarette, and because I wanted one, and we smoked a cigarette together, and I said, I'm here to be a director. I'm going to produce theater outside of the department, and I'm going to do it with the connections and the people here that I make. I don't want to make waves, but I want to make theater. I don't want to make theater for theater students. I want to make theater for people, which means not doing a lot of theater here in the department. I want to go outside and have real audiences and really learn my chops. And he was like, well, we'll put you up in Playwrights Horizons. And I was like, no, you won't, because I got in here as an actor. I auditioned as an actor. I was accepted to the Experimental Theater Wings as an actor at Experimental Theater Wing, and that's where I want to go, because that's where the director, Kevin Kulke, is working. And that's where I want to learn how to direct. And the way I want to learn how to direct is by acting for good directors. That's the way. And that's what I did. And I got into Cheeselike's class as an actor. Once I was there, I wasn't there for like 2 days before he was like, hey, you're a director, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, how'd you know? He's like, I caught you watching what I was doing. And I was like, so I'm guilty. Do you want me to get out of the class? He's like, no, come over here, sit beside me. I'll show you what I'm doing as a director. So I got to learn a little bit as his knee, some of the techniques that the Polish Theater Lab had been doing a long time ago, which Grotowski himself pretty much abandoned after the paratheatric phase. For him, paratheatrics were the audience and the...
You studied with Grotowski?
No. Cieslak.
Who was a student of Grotowski's?
Cieslak was Grotowski's main actor, like his featured performer. He was like...
was Grotowski around when you were at NYU?
No, he's been out in California teaching, so I never studied with him. I don't want to study.
So he's still active?
Yes and no. He abandoned the theater as we know it, and he now practices really metaphysics.
I mean, what does practicing metaphysics mean?
Philosophy, not unlike...
He writes?
He writes, he teaches sometimes. But back in the day when Cieslak had worked with him, he was interested in this incredible discipline. And
Cieslak is Polish?
Yeah, or was. He's dead now. I studied with him just a year before he died, and he missed Grotowski, and he missed the period long ago. And his most famous role was called The Constant Prince, which is about a prince who is tortured and refuses to give up his friends. So that tells you a certain degree of the intensity of the content material they were working with. He received a Drama Desk Award out of Critics Circle. I think it was 1965. He just basically swept the city by storm. People had never seen that kind of intensity on stage before.
Did you do any Shakespeare?
He was working with Peter Brook, actually, when he first started teaching at NYU. He was playing the blind man in the Mahabharata for Peter Brooks.
Did you do any Shakespeare at NYU?
Yes, my thesis project was Hamlet, and I directed it in the off-Broadway space there, and we gutted out all the seats, and we made a set that surrounded the entire audience, and all this crazy stuff that happened in Elsinore happened above and around the audience at all times. And
Cieslak was into Shakespeare in terms of...
He discussed King Lear with me at some length, actually. Even then, I was very interested in it.
But you didn't work with him on the Hamlet?
He gave me some tips. He was willing to talk with me about it. He gave me some tips, and he came and saw it and gave me some feedback.
Tell me about your experience with Shakespeare, when it started, when it developed, because you've got a lot of Shakespeare. I mean,
sure.
Perhaps even most, well, I don't know about most, but a lot of what you've done as a professional director has been Shakespeare.
Yeah.
When did you start with it? How did it develop? How did it touch you? How did it get into you? Whatever.
Sure. Well, when I was a child, when I was a little teeny kid, believe it or not, I just heard my mom made a tape of when I was first learning to talk, and I learned to speak in a pure Cumberland accent. I spoke with a complete accent of where my parents obviously were from, Cumberland. Now, Cumberland itself is mentioned in the biography of Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King's mentor was from Farmville, which is the capital of Cumberland, Virginia, where I'm from. And they say...
Who was King's mentor?
Was his name John Bishop? Is that
Preacher?
wrong? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
God damn it, what was his name? I'm so
That's
sorry.
okay. Our audience might know.
I hope so. So correct me. Sorry about that. I know Malcolm X's name. It was Malcolm X. Anyway, this biographer criticizes Martin Luther King's mentor's accent as being Elizabethan and correspondingly backward, because he learned the accent of Cumberland County, which was retained the accent of its original Scots settlers, and was therefore Elizabethan and correspondingly backward.
And you read this book about the mentor?
Only recently. Somebody actually brought it to me.
Oh,
they said,
okay.
hey, your county's in here. You're from Cumberland, right?
Sure, sure.
He's like, no wonder you do Shakespeare. I was like, why do you say that? He's like, because look, your original accent is Elizabethan and correspondingly backward. He showed me the quote in the book. It was funny, Ken Schatz did that. He's got a lot on the ball. He's a brilliant actor. And a great collaborator. He's also a wonderful voice teacher. I've worked with him a lot as an assistant director and as a voice coach. He brought that to my attention, and to tell you the truth, I first read Shakespeare when I was very young, 7 or 8. I remember my mom...
7 or 8?
Yeah.
In the original?
Yeah. It just never seemed like a problem to me. I never had a problem with the syntax or the words.
You just knew the words?
Well, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I read this book, and she said, you sure did. Because I used to get a special allowance called book money, like I could spend on books. I love books. I love books. And I said, I read this book. She's like, you sure did. And I'm like, it was the longest book I ever read. She's like, it sure was. And I was like, now how long a book can I read now? She's like, you can probably read any book of any length. It just might take you more time.
And you were how old?
8 or 9.
And you read what?
Well, the first one I read was, I think, was Hamlet.
At 8 or 9?
And I read A Midsummer Night's Dream closely in there, but I didn't read it until I was like, until I was in Paris. I went through a period of reading Shakespeare again.
So after the 7th year, then going to Paris at 18 or so, the second time you read Shakespeare?
Yeah, well, except for I had to read it in high school for classes all the time, but for me
then
it was easy.
something happened. Something really got it in you. Something really put it there to stay.
That was college.
College at NYU.
Yep. Because I had honed my skills after the 3rd year. I had directed at that
Junior year.
Junior
the end
year.
Of junior. By the end of junior year.
By the end of junior year, I directed like 9 or 10 professional productions outside of the school. And some of them were very well attended. Like my production of Cowboy Mouth was packed. I did it in a funeral home. It was a sellout. And
Cowboy Mouth.
Cowboy Mouth. It's on there. And
how'd you get that?
So I wrote him and asked for the permission to do it. They gave it to me. I did it with a wonderful actor, Michael Lawrence, and Angel Rogers, who's an incredible rock and roll
Is that a good play?
Yeah, it's a brilliant play.
What's it about?
It was written by, the legend goes that Cowboy Mouth was written by Patti Smith and, what's his name? I just said it. Sam Shepard went on a big drunk at the Chelsea Hotel. And the idea was that they had a bottle of vodka and a typewriter, and he would write the voice, like what the man would say, and then and she would drink the vodka, and then they'd switch. And she would write what the female would say, and he'd take a slug, and then they'd switch. That's the legend. And it makes it kind of American, romantic realism, weird cowboy, rock and roll, dream myth play. It's one act. It's rock and roll. We had live rock and roll, and it was a great band. Eddie and everybody was great.
Now, do cowboys have a certain symbolism for you?
Oh, sure.
What?
My grandparents were both cattle farmers.
Right.
So the independence of cowboys, of course, I mean, as the country music song says, all my heroes are cowboys. I'll tell you a funny cowboy story. A funny cowboy story is, I was up getting my permit to shoot some film up to shoot A Midsummer Night's Dream as a feature film up at the Mayor's Office of Film and Television, getting the permit. And as I'm sitting there, like, waiting to get my permit, the director of the entire program up there for permits is talking to somebody on the phone, and he's sitting there and he's like, listen, man, guys are cowboys. They don't care about law. They care about getting it in the can. They don't care about how they leave your lawn. They don't care about anything. They'll break the law. They'll do what they got to do to get it in the can. They are cowboys. And I'm just sitting there looking at him with this big grin, and he looks at me, and like we just had this kind of moment where we grinned at each other, you know. And I thought, wow, that's filmmakers are pretty damn close to cowboys. The independence, the focus on the goal. I mean, it's all romanticism, and I'm a major romantic, so don't get me started.
Why are you romantic? Why do you say that?
Because I'm an optimist. I believe in you know, crazy notions like beauty and love and you know, transcendent ideas of the individual, and I try, and that's what my art probably is, an expression of those ideas.
What are your transcendent ideas?
Well, I'm just the idea of transcending the individual itself. The idea that for a little while everybody sit down and agree on something is pretty damn magical to me. And if that something is a long, involved story that has multi-levels and is extremely articulate and emotional, well, my God, it's something short of a miracle. So I'm in the business of making those miracles.
Is theater making miracles?
Certainly. I think it's a miracle.
The theater?
No, when it works right.
You had some...
It's good. It's a miracle.
Some association with the living theater?
I met Judith Molina. She's an incredibly intense woman. And I met her daughter, and they bailed me out when we got booted out of Grand Central for They hosted us there for a number of consecutive Sundays to do the show. This is when they had a theater over on Avenue C, but they don't have one anymore.
Right.
But when they had an actual theater plant, they donated it to us for some performances. That's where Brian Parks came and reviewed the show.
And this was in what year? 80...
Whatever's on the resume.
Whatever Ubu was, 89.
89.
Wow.
Bad memory for that kind of
So
stuff.
I guess you never met Julian Beck.
No, he was dead. Unfortunately. I read about him. I read things he's written.
When you started, when you got out of Tisch,
Went out with a blaze of glory, because that's when I did. You had asked me how I encountered him.
I guess I should mention that you, talking about blazes of glory, you got the Department of Drama Award for Outstanding Contribution as independent director and producer.
Yeah.
A lot of guys, I guess, or gals vying for that, probably?
Well, everybody was working hard. It was a unique, in a sense, it was almost not competitive. It's not an award that they've given out before or since. Ron Argelander...
Was that for, by the way, for Hamlet?
That was for everything I had done in all 4 years. Okay. And the reason I got into Shakespeare was because I felt that my chops were up for it, and so I took a 3-month rehearsal process. We did a paratheatric retreat. We did the whole 9 yards, and basically, you know, I worked really hard, and Ron had found a way of making me care. Well, what he really did was he took the things I cared about and made them part of my program. And so when I actually jumped through all the rings and hoops they asked us to jump through, I was delighted to find out that they had decided to honor me for it. Arthur Bartow is the current artistic director of the graduate drama department, recently extraordinarily flattered me, was extremely honoring of me. He decided to give me an alumni award for creating Guerrilla Rep, and that the ceremony will be in the fall.
Why'd you call it Guerrilla Rep, by the way? I know you started by calling it Guerrilla like
with a U.
fighters.
Yeah, I didn't like that. So we went to the O, because the animal is evocative.
Which also evokes the gorilla anyway, so...
Right on. With a U or an O, and that's what I want them to ask. Mm-hmm. And repertory is this European idea that I have, that once I've done a show and done it well, I want to do it again and again. I want to find a larger and larger audience for it.
One of the things that the Living Theater is famous for is their action with the audience. Do you feel that you might have borrowed anything from that, or...?
Without question, no question in my mind that the blazing...
Because Judith Molina has been on this show a couple of times, actually.
She's a legend for good reason.
Well.
You know, Hannon, that's... Yeah, sure, I met Hannon. They were...
Her husband.
I know. They were... you know, they offered us that clutch time, and I think it shows, you know, their
well, they've been in prison a few times themselves. probably know.
Yeah, well that makes...
Did you see the John Teitel book about the Living Theater?
The Living Theater, I think I did see that, but it's been a while.
Not the only one.
The one where the book that I got the most out of was Judas Maline's Diaries.
Sure.
That's incredibly instructive. I have that. Actually, I gave
quite well written also.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I think the first one, and I haven't done anything that's made me immortal yet. That's drive, folks. That's intensity.
Do you want to be immortal that way? I mean, is it something about the artistic production thing that and the immortality that it creates?
Well, people are beating on the Duchamp dead horse a lot, but you know it's been true since I started working. And Duchamp is what he said was, listen, if I create a work that's of any validity at all, it's going to wander off and have a life of its own. And I feel that extremely strong. My works, luckily for me, have had a very vibrant life of their own. I didn't plan to get kicked out of Grand Central Station. I didn't plan to spend 28 hours downtown for bonking somebody on the head.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's not Duchamp. The idea of living through one's works or something like that. I mean, it's been thousands of years.
Kevin Kulke said it best. He said, you got to make sure that that your theater is a part of your life, not that your life is subsumed to the theater. And I agree completely. I have written a novel. I have written a screenplay. I pursue the venues that I need to pursue as intensely as I can to. Because the problem is that when your life is your theater, when my life becomes exclusively, I lose perspective, and the messages that I start having to bring to the theater are inbred and didactic and boring. Like I said, I've never been interested in making theater.
Can you repeat the last statement?
I feel that when I let the theater take over my life, that it becomes the things that I have to bring to the theater now are based therefore on the theater, and the things I have to say are inbred, didactic, and boring. So I try to keep an active life outside of the theater, and to keep my mind open, and to keep involved and engaged in this madness that we call life, so that I have interesting things to bring to the theater from another place.
What have you brought to the theater from your own life, do you think?
It's intensely personal, intensely specific for every production. I mean, there's a door, there's a window, there's a key. Why this play? Oh. And often you have to just keep banging on it.
Give us some of those specifics, if you would, for different plays.
Well, I mean, like asking an actor.
Let's start with Lear. I mean, what have you brought to Lear that you think, from your own experience, that gives you insight into Lear as a play?
As long as you're willing to acknowledge that that's a personal question, then I'll answer.
Of course.
Right. It's like this. My grandfather was a very strong man. He went from being an airplane mechanic to being owner of a very successful business that he sold to Reynolds Aluminum for a lot of money. He was self-made. He was intensely successful by all of the other accoutrements of life, and yet he was abusive of my mother, and yet he was abusive of his wife. He was abusive of me, to the point of physical violence at times. He abdicated at the end of his life his responsibility to teach younger generation by his wisdom, to give us access to his wisdom, access to who he was. He cut us off from it, and I think because of that, died in the grips of alcoholism and of smoking to the point of chain smoking to the point he went to sleep. And I think that those excesses were perhaps the physical agent that killed him, but the emotional agent that killed him was his denial of his own legacy, his own impact on the generations that he created by agreeing to be a father and actually a grandfather. And so for me, the impact of generations has a special poignancy because of that. And being able to teach the lesson that you should remember, if you're an old person, that some of us young people really do look up to you, really do look to you for wisdom and guidance. And I'll tell you, Judith Molina is someone that takes that seriously. She's an older woman now who is every bit as vibrantly into her art and her responsibility as an artist, passing on the legacy of her work as any 20-year-old. No question. Much more than most 20-year-olds that I know. She's so if I can give that, so that's my way in for Lear. That's why I think that showing the abusive Lear, but the Lear who is struggling to change, changes too late, and therefore is killed by his realization that he's changed too late.
Did you speak to Melina Lear? Did you speak with her?
Jesus, Judith, I don't know. If I did, it probably influenced me profoundly, but I'm not good with that kind of stuff. I don't think we ever talked about it. I really don't think we talked about it directly because I wasn't engaged in directing and producing it at that time. I was too worried about Ubu and what the fuck was going to happen.
What about Yeats? You did a thing about Yeats sailing to Byzantium.
The Irish Shakespeare. Genius poet.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant man. Political man.
Did that in 1993 at Rainbow Center in New York City.
With a fine crew.
Why Sailing to Byzantium, that poem, by the way?
Well, we felt that...
not a place for old men and all that, right?
Right. We felt that what we were doing by putting together the Yeats pieces was... It's Christina Cabot, my fiance. I'm getting interviewed.
Sorry.
Give me a kiss.
How are you?
Hi. Where do we go from? Yeats. The Cuchulainn myth is retold several times in the text that was dramaturged for that by Matthew, really brilliantly. He's a writer and an editor of great standard. He's a graduate of Columbia English program and a brilliant editor. He put together all these short plays and lyrics, and it retold the story of Cuchulainn several times, but shifted subtly. And but we were also putting in lyrics and poetry, and we felt that the one thing that was true about it was that it had a real sense of telemetry, like where it was going, and where you were at the end was very different from where we were at the beginning. And so we thought that active verbs of sailing to Byzantium, this transforming the audience's perceptions and taking them to a new place, if you will, was key to the concept. Was where we were going.
Do you have any conception of Byzantium per se?
Well, I created it in stage picture with lots of shadows and movement. It was a shining golden place, but also a place of myth and very intense, warlike energies. That's what I thought. I thought the actors pulled it off really well, too.
Tell me about how you got involved in doing Shakespeare in Washington Square Park. Sure. What was your first performance in the park? How did you set it up?
Sure.
Not everybody can do it there, I guess, right?
I don't think so. I had just done Hamlet, and I wanted to do comedy. I was like, by God, I've cut my teeth on one of the greatest tragedies in the whole world, and I want to do a comedy. I want to continue with Shakespeare, but I want a comedy of Midsummer, of course. I was walking from where I was living at the time on Carmine Street through Washington Square Park. I walked up to the top of one of those skateboard hills, and I went, oh my God. And flights of angels came down and sang Hallelujah, and I saw it. Somebody built my set, and it leapt out of my mind almost formed at that point that the audience would move from place to place around that part of the park and follow the vibrant energy of the actor from place to place. And I did it that summer, and I've done it pretty much every summer since. It'll be my 7th year now.
What about getting permission and all that?
Well, I went to do an improv that first year with Oberon and Titania chanting and running into the hills.
Oberon
and Titania,
Titania.
Yeah, the king and queen of the fairies. And all their other fairies are chanting and running with them. And suddenly, like, the whole part of the park was full of, like, teenagers jumping up and down and chanting and Suddenly there's blue shirts everywhere, and the cop's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm trying to rehearse. He's like, you do have a permit for this. Get your people out of here. I'm going to arrest you. I said, okay. We fell back, went through the process and got a permit, and now every year since they've graciously given me a permit. Now this year they've given me more than a permit. They've given me permission to build a storage shed, permission to use power from the grid so we can use theater lights for Lear if we get it working right. And you know, in general, they've over the years become just, the more that they've gotten excited about what I'm doing over there, the more cooperative they've been, and the more helpful, really. I mean, that Smitty, the supervisor over there, just, the film over there wouldn't have happened without him. You know, he made sure that people stayed late for us, he made sure we had power there. He just, you know, he was really into what we've done in terms of bringing high-quality art to people, and he wanted to help. And he's been great about it.
What about the surrounding sounds and all that? I remember seeing a review that you hear the Shakespeare above the din of the boombox.
Yeah.
Is that true? Yeah. Oh.
Well, people for the most part don't steer their boomboxes over to where 200 people are obviously enjoying something. So for the most part, it's really not, that particular problem has gone away because we've just gotten huger and huger audiences. You see 300 people enjoying something, you're not going to go over and bother them with your boombox.
So that's sort of like a baloney journalistic flourish.
Well, journalistic flourish, you know, Brian's got himself a style. I go into the park and I embrace what's there in terms of the energy. The sirens going by, the actors will stop and like watch them go by and then go right into the line. The most wonderful serendipitous things happen when the actors are working hard and doing what they do well, which is incorporate a lot of what happens there in the park into their work. It's part of their genius, those actors.
What about this idea that you have a pretty Spartan approach to staging Shakespeare? That, you know,
I need two things to create theater. Two: actors and audience. That's it. All other stuff is gravy. And if I do those two things well, you won't even notice that the other things aren't there.
Oh, yeah, there's a couple more details other than that.
I'd care for that.
They say that you do very simple costumes. White t-shirts or simple pants or whatever.
That was just a design solution to, I wanted when people saw this group of people jumping around over there from 200 yards away, I wanted them to know that it was something they were doing together. So if they're all wearing the color white, which shows up well in low light conditions, they get a sort of a statement of, oh, they're over there doing a performance together. And they come close and they say, oh, it's Shakespeare. They come close, oh, Midsummer Night's Dream, wow.
Would you do something with lavish costumes?
Of course.
You would?
I wouldn't rule it out. It all, everything is defined for me fully by the production. What's right for the show, and that's what's right for Midsummer's.
What do you get out of directing theater personally? Would you say? What's the personal benefit, payoff, enrichment?
I get money sometimes.
That's one thing.
But it's not everything. Believe me, I don't get paid enough. No, it's. I know what you're asking, and I can tell you that when that miracle occurs, and the actors are using the audience as the rest of their cast, and the audience is loving being the rest of the cast, the courtiers in A Midsummer Night's Dream, or additional fairies, or whatever. When the miracle happens, that the whole thing, the actors' hard work and the audience's attention and everything comes together to tell these incredible stories, and everyone can be fully participatory in them, and people come to me with this energy and excitement of having been embraced by a much larger and more overwhelming and inclusive thing than they ever thought that art could be or that theater could be. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that, watching that work, being the Geppetto. You know, I get to watch Pinocchio dance.
Power play?
I don't think so, because I'm not on stage now.
Well, Geppetto wasn't on stage either. Pinocchio was.
But Pinocchio went from being a puppet to being a real boy who danced on his own. That's what I like to see. That cast ticking over like a fine-tuned machine, I don't have to touch it. I'm like,
can't touch this.
Can't touch this. I directed that. You know? It's wonderful to have a writer like Ben Brantley show up and like really get what I'm doing. You know, he got it. He was like, he saw what I was going for. He saw it happen, and he was there on a magical night, and is a very intelligent and erudite and insightful writer, and brought that, I think, to a certain extent to his review. That's very satisfying to have people understand, to have people embrace, have people support, to want more. That's my greatest satisfaction, is people saying, I want more. What's next? when can I come see your next thing? That's part of the real payoff. Yeah.
Why did you choose theater rather than film when you went to Tisch?
That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done film since, but I know...
Why not film? I mean...
I shot some short
You
experimental
must have had some ideas about both before
sure.
you did it.
Sure, I shot some short
What
experimental
was the
films in high school.
calculation, or...
It wasn't. It was just that I knew that what I did really well was theater, and if I was gonna do film, it was gonna grow out of theater, and that's exactly what's happened. And like my mom once said to me, she said, you know, I was writing short stories, I was writing poetry, some of it got published. I was like, should I write a novel? And she was like, Chris, don't even think about writing a novel until you're over 30, because you're not going to have anything that's worth saying that's of a novel length until you're over 30. And that philosophy with me is a certain degree what I've brought to film directing. I felt like I didn't have the thoroughness, the intensity, the wisdom, the patience necessary to contribute something original to film until just last year, when I felt I had to bring to my most thoroughly known work, which was Midsummer's, and I translated that into film as a separate entity. As anyone who, if you see that thing, one thing you can say is that's not theater on film. That's a film. That's shot to be a film. I had a great DP, Adam Vardy. You know, that's one of the most great lessons you can learn as a film director is you've got to have a brilliant DP. Great.
So you did the Midsummer's Night on 16mm.
We shot it on 16. Yeah.
Are you satisfied with that?
What I've got so far, I'm happy with. I'm glad to say that I'll be a better director on my next feature film, but I'm happy with it. Yeah.
So maybe you see certain things that aren't translatable into film, or there's...
Of course not. Theater is ephemeral.
I don't understand that so much. Could you explain to me what's not...
Sure, theater.
What's not translatable and what is translatable, and what the difficulty...